If you're lost in the jungle, use the satellites. If you're broke in the city, sneak on the bus line. You lost your job, cause it was mechanized. They said we have to compete when the market's globalized. Everything is electrified. Whew, everything is electrified. How about, oh, hang on now. There it is. How about we start out with a song? Settle down, ooh, settle down. Take it easy on me. I ain't willing to lose, but I'm willing to admit I was wrong. 'Cause there's only so much time in the day, and there's only so much that I can say. Learn to listen. Learn to listen. Learn to listen. Yeah. There's a picture in your mind of what you used to be, and the hunger of ambition is a wish that you won't feed. And the hum of the highway is a distant sense of speed. Yes, you got your hammer and your chisel. It feels like old technology, but there's only so much time in the day, and there's only so much that I can say. Oh, learn to listen. Oh, learn to listen. Your way out from the city, fold yourself back in the hills, find your church out in the meadow, and remember to be still, and just listen to the quiet, that wild rippling sound, and you find that you're here. Yes, and you find that you're now, 'cause there's only so much time in the day, yes, and there's only so much that I can say. Oh, learn to listen. Learn to listen. Oh, learn to listen. Yeah, good morning. Thank you, thank you. I have no idea why tears came to my eyes this morning. I have no idea. It is kind of cool, all the circles that happen, things that emerge. Sunnergoss, one of the sponsors, is actually the very first place I performed a solo show in Louisville, Kentucky. I know. It was at well, I guess it was the first Sunnergoss over on Preston. I was in college at University of Louisville at the time, and I was doing my early morning hours on the computer because I was doing a lot of touring and shows while I was in college, which was not the best play. And so they would let me in the early hours while they were still getting things together. And one day I was just like, could I bring my cello over and play some shows? And they're like, yeah. I mean, we can't pay you. I'm like, no, I wouldn't. I just want to try some songs. And of course, that led to some really beautiful shows at Sunnergoss as they grew and did good stuff in the world. So thank you for having me. Thanks for all the volunteers and folks that have put this on and the invitation to speak to you all. I wasn't exactly sure what to talk about. There was a theme that was presented of simplicity, which, I like that theme, especially in a very complicated world. Last time I spoke in 2016 at a CreativeMornings, I spoke on the idea of affection, how affection, as Wendell Berry says, it all turns on affection, which is to say people protect things that they care about, and if they have an intimate knowledge or affection for something, whether that's their sneakers or a mountaintop, they will choose to protect it. And I spoke about leveraging the arts to grow affection, especially around various social and environmental issues, like mountaintop removal, strip mining. And, since then I've done many shows and I've done a lot of growing. I've really focused my mission now on using, music, arts, creativity to create experiences that grow a greater sense of togetherness. And the idea is to reduce loneliness and deaths of despair. That's really what I'm really focused on these days. And so as part of that, I'd like to continue that idea of affection, but maybe go one layer deeper and talk today about relationships. I'd like to talk about using the framework of relationship to be more sustainable, nurturing, and, live with better reciprocity in the world, whether that's the material world, being in relationship with nature, being in relationship with other people, being in relationship with, what else did I think of in the material world? Oh, our own bodies, right? The embodied experience, being in relationship with your body. Or it's the non-material world, right? So dealing with, emotions, depression, addiction, your future self, right? It's a non-material thing that has a big impact on who you are now. And, but maybe most importantly for this audience and today, creativity. Like many of us, I imagine all of us, right? The pandemic shook up my whole understanding of the world and my place in it. It also changed by humbling me and grounding me, my relationship to my creativity. And my hope is that if by sharing my story and some of my thoughts around this, that it might spark something in each of you, particularly those of you who may be struggling with disenfranchisement, loneliness on this journey. Maybe you're dealing with burnout. Anybody? Anybody? Woo, buddy. Or those of you that are just like, you're just looking for a healthier, more sustainable way to be creative in your life, but also in this world. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and how I got here to this moment, standing in front of you all. And then I want to talk about kind of the new way of thinking and kind of a way of being that emerged from that path. And then we'll talk about, how that has affected my relationship with creativity. And hopefully that will, inspire something for you all. I was born and raised in Lexington, Kentucky. Any Lexingtonians here? Okay, yeah. Yes. I had a very musical family. My mama sang. Daddy was an R&B guitar player. My grandfather, Elvis, was an old-time fiddle player and musician in Appalachia. And I loved playing music. I loved playing music with my family. I loved playing music with my friends. I picked up the cello in public schools, a moment for public schools. Yes. I was 9 years old, and it was like an instrument petting zoo. I loved it. And growing up, my musical heroes were not cellists. I loved Michael Jackson. I loved Ani DeFranco. I loved Paul Simon, Nina Simone, Pete Seeger. Those are the folks that I was into growing up. Interestingly, many of those artists, maybe all those artists, would incorporate social and environmental missions into their work. So it was like part of the fabric of being an artist, as I understood it, was to use your art to do good. I didn't understand that till later, but that's what I was into as a kid. I started touring when I was 17 years old. So I was still in high school, and I started touring around with a blues artist named Otis Taylor, 6'4", blue-eyed black man who played trance blues, taking a little white boy out from Kentucky, out around the world, and it's pretty fun. And that went on through college. I studied at the University of Louisville, got a cello performance degree with the cellist there, Paul York. And during that time, I was touring all over the world with Otis, and then a lady named Abigail Washburn, and then later a band called the Sparrow Quartet with Bela Fleck and Casey Dreesen. We did tours, all over North America, but also throughout China and even in Tibet. We were one of the few State Department tours that they allowed to come in, because Abigail, whose music I would definitely recommend you all check out, is a Mandarin-speaking Appalachian artist. So they were like, wait. The Chinese consulate was like, wait. There is a white American lady that speaks Mandarin Chinese and plays folk music? Blah! This is the way we show the world that we're winning. So we got to go tour through Tibet, which was super special. And during that time, I'm in school full time. I'm touring, somewhere around, 150, 200 dates a year with bands, and also maintaining a relationship in my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky. So I was running, y'all. Run. My relationship with my body was not good. And that continued on after graduating. I hit the road full time, so over 200 dates a year, and learning, growing, building my road family, and tinkering with the idea of stepping out from the sideman role into a solo role as, wait for it, a singing cellist. Great idea. Lots of examples of success. Anybody know any famous singing cellists? Right, that's my point. And but I was that's okay. I felt resonant with the cello and went for it. and recorded my first record and released it in 2007 here locally with a show at 21C. Yeah. And it was really cool. Brought together the Louisville Ballet and all these other stakeholders. It was very beautiful, and I would show you a video of it if it hadn't been washed in the laundry by the videographer. Yes, so that was back in a different time of media. Media management, y'all. Just saying. Anywho, I also started my family in 2007. I met my wife, and we had our first child, my son Oliver West, and who's now 15. Watch out. Sophomore at Ballard. That shit's crazy. And, you know, so now I'm hitting the road really hard. I'm still working as a sideman, but I'm also working a solo career, so building that. I have a new baby at home, a new relationship as well with my wife. And so I just kind of keep adding to the pile of things. Like, sure, school's done, but, just keep going, right? Like, eat when you can, sleep sometime, right? Just keep going. Like, I had to be creative. I had to hustle. And then, oh, by the way, the beginning of the Great Recession, everything crashes. And so then it's like more hustle, right? Like, you can do this. And the expectation is now not just that you write songs, record them, perform, drive, do all the things, but you also need to do more of that to compete. And touring becomes ever that much more important. At some point, well, it's always been this way, but at some point I really started being much more public about my activism especially around environmental issues. I cared very much for the land and water of Kentucky and kind of the greater Appalachian region. I did a record with some other Kentuckians, Daniel Martin Moore and Jim James from My Morning Jacket, called Dear Companion. And that record was about celebrating Appalachia first, and then acknowledging the fact that it's being destroyed by something called mountaintop removal, strip mining. We took that tour all over the country to raise awareness for the issue. We raised a lot of money to try to stop the issue, and we put a lot of our hearts into that. Along the way, I also did a lot of work with organizations like Oxfam America, the Nature Conservancy, to try to deal with poverty in Appalachia, but also, preserve land for, those people, but also for our future needs, all the future citizens that have yet to arrive. And in that time, I learned a lot about using art, my music, and the stage as a way to connect people around an issue. Again, grow affection, and that was great. But it added like one more aspect to it, right? I was like, I can fit more in, right? I can tour, I can do all the organizing and activism along the way. We can stage protests, we can do all this stuff, and so a little less sleep, a little more go, and that was just the way that I expected myself to go, and I think that's the way a lot of people expected me to be as an artist as well. The more I told that story, the more the story told me. At that time, also, the music industry was shifting, right? So streaming platforms are coming on board. People are starting to use those free platforms instead of buying records. More and more and more, and now it's quite common for people to not buy any CDs at all. Quick poll. How many of you all have purchased a CD in the last 2 weeks? I'm getting there. How many of you all have purchased a vinyl disc in the last 2 weeks? All right, I love it. Okay, we'll extend it to a month. Okay, cool, for our visiting Brooklynite. Like, it's in the month we've bought a vinyl. How many of you all subscribe to a streaming service? Yes. Moment of truth. How many of you all pay for the streaming service? Hey, all right. We got you on board. Okay. But for artists, it's an extreme and fairly abrupt change over a 5-year period from having some revenue from sales to almost zero revenue from sales. And so touring becomes even more important. And so I'm getting on the road as much as I can as I raise the family, do the activism, and all the other things going on. And through that activism, I start getting calls to make music for documentary films around environmental issues, social issues, people that are connecting to my values saying like, hey, I'm making this little movie, could you do some music for it? And I said yes, because that's what you do as a singing cellist. And that began like a little bit of a side hustle, making music for movies, for TV shows. And interestingly, it wasn't going out to LA and taking meetings, it was connecting with people through values. And that's something I look back on and be like, huh, didn't really plan, that wasn't a strategic element. And that has led to a really cool career that I can tell you more about if we're interested in it. But all of this work was leading up, all of this kind of like unsustainable energy that I was putting into my career, into my family, into my community, into the environment, led to a pretty extreme case of burnout that I did not recognize for years. And it wasn't really until after 2016 when it felt like the bottom dropped out. Like so much of the work I did on the environmental and social front just went, disappeared. And because it was spread very thinly around the country, right? It wasn't like deep-rooted work. It was a bike lane here and a protest against the pipeline there, and like little things that just didn't really, like, they weren't rooted, so they just were easy to move. And I found myself looking for a change. And so I came off the road. And during that, I came off the road in 2017. Still did some shows, but for the most part was off the road. I grew my family with my wife. We have 3 kids now. Stop it, don't do that. I'm feeling very vulnerable right now because I haven't really told this story publicly because I feel maybe a little bit ashamed about it, that I like gave up on my career somehow. Hang on. I'm gonna drink some coffee. It is good coffee. So I took my creativity and I went out, knocked on some doors. I took a job at a marketing agency called BISIG Impact Group. Really cool group of people. I was associate creative director there for about a year. And during that time, I did a lot of cool work. A lot of work for healthcare agencies. Anybody? Anybody? And I learned a lot about production and timelines, working as a team. I also learned that I didn't get a lot of choice on what project we were working on. And suddenly I found myself being asked to work on political campaigns that I was not aligned with. So that led me to connecting with a organization called Canopy that was just beginning to start up. Canopy is a Louisville-based, we were based in Portland neighborhood, organization that is helping connect and grow good business in Kentucky. When I say good business, these are the businesses that are kind of verifying their good in the world by, making sure that they're paying people appropriately, that they have an equitable approach to their hiring, that they're taking care of the environment, land, all these things, and they're measuring that and showing that in a very public, transparent way. Canopy has since grown and now has a certification for Kentucky-based businesses to be able to show they're good. And I started with them in 2018 as the director of engagement and helped build their branding, their initial grounding story, and all of their user experience. And they have since grown quite a bit. During the Great Pause, my role was reduced down to a director of not director. What is my role? Media and production specialist, I think is what what I do. It's a part-time job to keep things going. Shh, nobody knows about this. See, I don't talk about this in my public career, but with you all, I feel like it's important to share this. So I'm cruising along. I'm working at Canopy. I am also still doing a lot of film scoring. I'm working on 2 or 3 feature films a year, as well as a few different TV shows in my little home studio. And you know, things are going pretty good. I mean, it's a lot with these little kids. But then March of 2020 rolls around, and there is the great pause. Now, I had a few conversations out in the audience before we began, and it was really, you know, it's a good reminder. We all had to, like, pause and reflect, and many of us had to hustle, right? Like, I know personally, since I lost so much revenue from touring, that from touring and all the other film scoring projects that just stopped, that I took on way more work than was possible for a human to do, even remotely, right? I think at one point I had 5 different employers during the pandemic. Anybody can relate? Anybody? Yeah? Yeah? It was a lot. It was a lot. So I wasn't sleeping. I had our 3rd child was born in February of 2020. So we had a brand new baby, new pandemic. I think my wife would be okay with sharing that she was diagnosed with lupus. And so I had a very sick partner. Damn it. It was a lot. And I still hadn't learned to take care of myself. Thanks. Thanks, darling. Hi. I promise I'm going to get to something that's not about me. I just hope that the vulnerability is helping you all connect with this. Okay, good. It was a really tough time, I know, for everybody. And so we did our best. We made, and I was always leaning on my creativity, just like, you got to make this. You got 3 hours. Make that cue for that film score. You got an hour. Get that video out. You got to set up the streaming for that night. Go, 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 go. Very exploitative, right? Like, I used my creativity like a resource, and I used it without boundary, and I just took and took and took and took and took in a very extractive Western way that I think many of us were trained on, right? More productive, optimized for efficiency, and client approval, right? Just go, go, go. And that all changed for me when our family, like a lot of families, caught COVID, so October of 2020. And that was early times, just like, I don't want to take anybody back there, trigger warning. But there weren't tests, right? There wasn't any shots, there wasn't anything. We were being as careful as we possibly could, and I have an immunocompromised household. This shit is dangerous, right? So we push through, we make it through, everybody gets better. But a couple months go by, and I'm just not getting better. I have this like intense fatigue and body pain. This is way more emotional than I expected it to be, y'all. I'm like making notes. I'm like, just tell your story so you can get to the thing. I got intense body pain, fatigue. I've got vertigo and just kind of like this general, they call it brain fog, but it was way more than brain fog. I can't smell or taste. I have this intense anxiety that settles into a depression. And I'm like, this is bad. I feel so isolated from everything. And I'm not playing any shows, right? And, you know, at some point in early 2021, so 4 months in, I started hearing this like voices like, you don't want to be here. What is this for? And I knew it wasn't my voice. So I was like, I need some help. So I reached out to my network. I have a beautiful network
always reach out, make the call, people. And people suggested all sorts of therapies. We're talking, have you tried burning citrus? Have you tried shrooms? What about a water fast? Maybe a water fast? I go to the doctor at Norton in the special long COVID clinic for all us long haulers. She says, well, we did all your blood work, we poked, we prodded. Things are fine. You know, maybe it'll be a couple months. We don't know. Might be a year. Might be just the way it is now. And I'm like, no. This is not the way it is. So from my loving network and my friends, I got a lot of suggestions, but one of them landed home as, being one, common sense, and two, achievable, with long COVID being basically a metabolic disorder that causes inflammation in your body, which was a plant-based, whole food diet. So I go full on. I make the switch, I clean out the house as best as I can with little kids around. Man, there's a lot of treats you can get into. And I make the switch. And within 2 weeks of making that switch in my life, I had a dramatic shift in my health, right? So the fatigue and the body pain went away. The anxiety and depression lifted. And a lot of the kind of brain fog and cognitive stuff really improved as well. And I was like, whoa, what is that? How did that happen? Of course, there's the old adage, food is medicine, right? You are what you eat. But I'd never really had a relationship with that. It was like an exchange. It was like I will eat when I can and what I can. If it's a burger at 2 a.m., done. And so it kind of introduced this idea of being in relationship with the food. And I would notice, if I would start to divert, which is to say, if I would give my body something that it didn't want or need for its health, I would be quickly reminded of why I'd made that change, right? I'd be very confused, the body pain would come back, and it's like, whoop, nope, don't do that. So it became this call and answer, this conversation with my body. And I was like, wow, okay, all right. And I started really nerding out on it. Some symptoms persisted. I still couldn't smell or taste. I still had brain fog and occasional vertigo, and really struggled with kind of staying focused and producing. But, I kept learning more and more about food, microbiome, exercise, sleep. Any of y'all know about sleep? Any of y'all know about how much you need? What does it do? These are things that I was learning about. I was like, really? So you mean when I don't sleep, I'm hurting myself? Yes. Okay. And so that went on, and I just kind of was on a journey of building a relationship with my body for the first time in my life as a 30-something-year-old fella who had grown up in Kentucky on a lot of the standard American diet, right? Sure, I was in gymnastics, but I would end gymnastics every day with a double Big Mac meal when I was a kid. You know it. Eating Big Macs, watching X-Files, that was my teenage years. And I started to see the interconnectedness, right? I started to really understand how I was in relationship with the food and where it was sourced from, the environment that I slept in, and light and sound. I started understanding myself as part of a greater whole rather than this individual who could produce a lot of creative work. And that was kind of a revolution for me, right? And I think that's bizarre because it seems so natural and innate, but I think particularly as males, we are really good at disconnecting from our bodies. I'm not to say that humans don't do that, especially in this society. I think guys are especially good at it. We're like, we'll be fine, you know? And for the symptoms persisted for about a year and a half, where I just couldn't smell and taste and struggled with this kind of, I don't know, brain fog and so on, until March of 2022. So last March, last year, I finally went back out on the road, and I had a show where I was booked to play 10 shows solo in 10 days. And so I go out there and I sit down on my first show in Atlanta, Georgia. It's these beautiful colonial gardens. Bunch of people show up, haven't seen me play in like 4 years, right? And I sit down and I start to play, and like I can't remember the words. I struggle to like sing, like really actually like more than just whoo. Woo. Sure, maybe I was a little out of shape, but really it was like things were not functioning, right? And I also just like the passion was missing for some reason. It wasn't connected. And I just like, I was being like, hey, would y'all mind looking up the lyrics on your phone for that and just remind me? While I'm playing shows and playing the show. And after that show, I just went off stage and I wept. I was like, maybe performing is done for me. Like maybe that's just not something that's going to happen anymore. And that was very emotional. But I still had shows to play, right? I'd committed to be at these shows, so I kept going. I'd spend more time warming up, and I would play the show, and I'm talking, and I'm singing, and like getting a little bit stronger each day. By the 6th or 7th show, I'm like, okay, it's coming back. I can do this. And then by the end of the tour, I was loading in to the venue, which is often in the back of the building where the dumpsters are. And I'm loading in. I'm like, oh, man, it stinks back here. It stinks back here. Yeah. And suddenly, like, my symptoms resolved, right? And it was a real mystery to me. I played that show, and, like, it happened to be at that show that there was a therapist that works at the VA in Pittsburgh, and I told him about it, and, like, wow, it's like it all came back. And he was like, well, yeah, it's called breathing. And he told me about diaphragmatic breath, and he told me about the vagus nerve, and he told me about how that system can work together to align your nervous system, right? Your parasympathetic system, which of course makes sense now. I'm like, I was in fight or flight the whole damn time, but it didn't make sense, and so it was music and the performing and all of the adjacent health benefits that come with singing a song like I just sang, like the long tones, the deep breathing. And so I was like, well, shit, if I can do that by mistake, what can I do if I put my mind to it? So y'all, this cellist who had been burnt out for like basically 10 years and hustling, started taking vocal lessons. Yes. I got a breathing therapist, and I started like really working on breath support and building strength from the inside. I got a coach who helped me kind of understand how I was willing to be in the world. And I really expanded my circle of interconnectedness yet even more, right? The air I breathe, the air that we share, the food, the sleep. And I was just like, wow, I am part of something bigger. And that opened up like a little bit of a spiritual side to me. But I think more importantly, it just changed how I related to the world, right? And it's definitely changed how I relate to my creativity. So, that's the story, y'all. I hope it connected with you. I now am grateful for COVID because we talked about gratitude. Because it forced me in a state of kind of like poverty, right? You don't know how rich you are until you don't have your health. And in that humbled state, I was like, oh, hi, body. We should be in a healthier relationship together. I'm sorry I forced you to do all that stuff. But now let's talk, right? Like when I exercise, like what are you willing to do today? And that has really helped me center in what is very a complex world, right? We all are dealing with the challenges of being makers and creatives and doers in a world that's constantly asking more of us, right? Our grandparents had careers, our parents had jobs, we got gigs, right? And then there's all of the kind of big macro stuff, right? Like the climate is changing and it's happening faster. We got social and environmental justice, like we got so much work to do. And snowball, right? There's so much to do, and it's very easy to get caught up in the complexity of the world and try to keep it all. And I want to just offer simplicity. The most radical thing, this is what I learned from my journey. The most radical thing you can do is to care for yourself. Not like as like a higher ideal or some optimized person, more productive. It's not the green powders or the clothing or like the massages. It's not that, right? It is as an aspect. Yourself as an aspect of nature, right? When you care for yourself as an aspect of nature, as a front line for protecting the environment, it gives you the opportunity to connect with non-humans, right? Plants, animals, the geosphere, right? It gives you the opportunity to recognize that you yourself are not you. You are a huge gathering, a kind of a microcosm of the whole world, right? You've got all these creatures and stuff that you're taking care of. They're your responsibility. And oh, by the way, we're going to exchange them all right now, right? Like we're constantly engaging and shifting into who we are, like literally what we're made up of. And that was really powerful to me, right? And I'm constantly I'm giving myself to the world and the world's giving itself to me. That felt much more organic, old growth. Care for yourself as an aspect of humanity, right? This was a big shift for me as somebody who was very like driven and always kind of taking. Care for who you have been, care for who you might be and what you're willing to be. That being in relationship with that has really helped me. And it helped me because it puts me on the front line of social change, right? If we're worried about public health, it starts with your health, right? If you're worried about, equity and access to goods, like, or education, like, it begins with you learning, right? It begins with you, but not to make yourself better, to help connect with what's going on in the world, right? Like as an aspect of a bigger body of nature. Being in relationship with who you are. I wrote here, the ongoing work of caring for the planet begins with not polluting your own body. Right? And for those that are so inclined, you spiritual folks, you can care for yourself as an aspect of the divine, right? Like something's going on that's making us. I don't know what you call it, but you are an aspect of it, and that's really powerful because it decentralizes the you and makes it connected to the rest of the world. And that is huge because it's a much more powerful, sustainable place to approach activism, right? Because you're taking action on climate change by resting. You're taking action on climate change, or you're taking action on, social justice by being creative and using less resources to do that with what you have around you, right? I think there's some good examples of this in the world. One of my favorites is the NAP ministry. Have you all heard about the NAP ministry? I see some nods. Let me tell you about the NAP. The NAP ministry was founded in 2016 by Tricia Hersey. And here's their statement. I love this. We believe rest is a form of resistance. And we name sleep deprivation as a racial and social justice issue. How many of you all agree with that? Yeah? Okay, let's see if we can get that number up higher. How many of you all feel like your anxiety and frustration is tied to not getting good sleep? Cool. How many of you all feel like if you are upset and angry, you have less capacity to care for others? How many of you all feel like long-term that happening causes health effects for you in your community? Yes? Okay. Rest, you taking time to sleep, is resistance, right? This is post-activism, right? This is about taking the complexity of the world simple. You can take action by caring for yourself as a greater whole, right? I think another good writer, thinker on this word is Bayo Akomolafe. I don't know if any of you all have read his book, The Wild Beyond Our Fences. It's amazing. He talks about post-activism as like, how do we live in the cracks between continuity? How do we live in between the cracks of like what has always been and what now is not, right? So that is my thoughts on simplicity in a complicated world. And for me, it has changed my relationship, most especially with my creativity, right? Because now instead of standing and being like, it's time to make, I visit with my creativity regularly. I'm like, hey, if I'm driving back from the gym, I'll be like, hey, creativity, I got like 15 minutes here in the car by myself. I'm going to turn off the radio. If you got anything, let me know. Sometimes I sit there and nothing happens. Sometimes lots of stuff happens. Sometimes I don't make time for it, and it still has something to say. And so I'm like, okay, give me a sec. I'll be right there. And I make time for creativity. Not as a resource, but as a relationship. And for me, this is very connected to what we are learning about, or is more accessible knowledge now about indigenous cultures, right? They have an idea of reciprocity and connectedness to the world that is quite different from the one and the kind of cosmology that I grew up with as a Kentuckian. And I think one of my favorite books that I've read is Braiding Sweetgrass. Have you all read Braiding Sweetgrass yet? No? So the author, Robin Wall Kimmerer, is an ecologist, and she is from the Potawatomi tribe, I believe. And so she created this book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which was about her path of learning her roots as an indigenous people. And she writes about the knowledge of old growth cultures rather than what we live in now as a very new growth culture, right? Old growth cultures having this connectedness, and she talks about something that I find really powerful that I want to share with you, which is the honorable harvest, right? And if you think about creativity as not a resource, as something, a living presence that you're there with in the world, that you're in relationship to, you don't want to just walk up and take it, right? It's something that you're like, the honorable harvest, as she says, it's not written down, right? She says it's a covenant of reciprocity between humans and the land. And she says if it were written down, it would go something like this. See if this resonates with you all and how you relate to creativity, right? Ask permission of the ones whose lives you seek. Abide by their answer. Never take the first and never take the last. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. That includes to yourself. Take only what you need and leave some for others. All right, creative community, makers. Use everything that you take. If it comes to you, use it. Take only which is given to you. That's very interesting when we think about scouring the world of creativity. Share it as the earth has shared it with you. It's not coming from you. I think that's fascinating. Be grateful. Reciprocate the gift. If you receive creativity, give it to others. And then sustain the ones who sustain you. And the earth will last forever, right? Replace earth with creativity, and you've got a much more sustainable, I think, healthier approach to being a creative individual in this very busy, very fast-paced world. And for me, that's also showed up in the idea of listening, tuning, and being willing to become something that I wasn't before. As somebody who was born white, male, Kentucky, I'm now asking myself, would you be willing to be connected, to be more sustainable, to be healthier, stronger, more generous? Like willingness, right? Constantly asking that. Which reminds me of a very ancient, maybe the very first form of music. Call and answer. Right? When you're being creative, you make the call. You're like, hey, I wonder if blah, 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 and see what comes back. If you're in the gym and you're like working those reps and you're like getting to that point where it's like, would you be willing to do one more? The answer might be no today. The answer might be 3 more the next day. But if you don't ask, you don't know. Otherwise, you'll just do your 10 and move on. And so, like, as an example of that, I just want to try that here. Just as a reminder, like, this is how I now live my day with creativity and my body and my relationship with my kids and everything else. I say, hey. I say, ho. I said, hey. Ho. I said, whoa. Gonna let it shine. 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 That's how I live my life these days, people. I'm just like, whoa. Does that feel right? Does that resonate? Not yet. What if? What would you be willing to do? Call. That resonates. Do, 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 do. Call. No. That was the answer, right? Call. Yeah. Ooh, do, 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 do. That feels good. Can I make it more resonant? Ooh, do, 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 do. This is how I work with creativity now. And there are times where the answer is not there. Sometimes I'm like, I mean, right now the answer is there. I'm like, yeah, that's good. I don't know how to show you an example of the answer not being there when it's there. But it's a very old form for a reason, right? It's how we began making music. It's how we built our communities. It's how we built culture, right? We would call and they'd answer, or the nature would call and we would answer nature, right? It was in relationship with the world. But there's a couple like key things that I want to leave with you about how I have learned to be in relationship with creativity as a muse, as something that needs attention, just like a friend. Like you don't just call up a friend only when you need help moving a couch. That is not a friend. That is a furniture mover. Right? I have learned that you need to show up when there's no deadline and when there's no project. You still need to show up for your creativity. Because that's what you would do with a friend. That's what you would do with anything that you're in relationship with. It's healthier. You're not exploiting that relationship. You're not abusing that relationship, which means not abusing yourself. Gratitude when something emerges. Talked about this, right? Like when something does come, I say thank you. I'm like, thanks. That was cool. I don't know where that came from. Thank you. Trust when nothing comes. It's sitting there at the cafe and not having anything to say to your friend, but just enjoying their company, right? Because that's what you do with friends. That relationship is much healthier. It is a relationship based on reciprocity, right? Ask before you take, give, right? And I believe that that simple idea of being in relationship to nature, your body, your creativity, is kind of a moral revolution. And frankly, the kind of revolution that I think we need in the world to be able to adapt to a fast changing world. Whether you're talking about changing weather or you're talking about generative AI tools, right? Being in relationship to your creativity is the way to be sustainable in that. And I think that it could provide us the resilience to be able to care for each other and live in better relationship with the environment as we go on. So I want to just kind of wrap up there. It took me a little longer to get through that story because it was emotional, y'all. But I'm grateful for your presence. I'm grateful for everybody being here. And if it's okay, I'll wrap up with a song. Is that all right? This one's for Kojin. My cello's name is Kay. Everybody say hi, Kay. She's feeling a little sassy this morning. She's feeling gruff. The trees are electrified. Your ears are electrified. Whoa, my voice is electrified. And my voice is electrified. If your heart is unsteady, they can make it beat in time. If your mind is confused, Lord, it will be clarified. If you're old-fashioned, yes, you will be modernized. Everything is electrified. Ooh, everything is electrified. Ooh, yes. If you're lost in the jungle, use the satellites. If you're broke in the city, sneak on the bus line. You lost your job, cause it was mechanized. They said we have to compete when the market's globalized. Everything is electrified. Whew, everything is electrified. Yes. My bare hands touch the base of your spine. I feel you shudder and close your eyes. Move like a swallow and I'm hypnotized. Everything is electrified. Everything is electrified. Some folks are heroes, others may be vilified. Assess your losses, learn to diversify. Find your higher calling and evangelize. Build your congregation, now you're televised. Everything is electrified. Oh, everything is electrified. Yes, everything is electrified.